All right, I wanted to get a new video pushed out here to mainly address those of you coming at SCORM fresh. You've never even heard of it before, or maybe you had and you just never really gave it a look. That's cool. The thing's about 20 years old now. It's got its driver's license. It's been on the road for a few years. But all jokes aside, I've been in business for just over 10 years now. I mainly focused on delivering the cogs, if you will, or the small gears that you add to your platform to help get you SCORM support. I chose to do that because I'm basically not in the LMS business and I'm not designing content. I have done that in the past life, from a contractual standpoint or otherwise. But just be aware, I developed the SCORM content API at the same time that I developed my SCORM runtime APIs. And these are mainly application programming interfaces to make life easier. SCORM itself is a series of get values and set values, all based on keys that you're supposed to just know. And I know anybody new to that, there's so many, I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but they had an object, data goes in it, data comes out of it. That's what the platform uses to kind of base whether a score has occurred, progress has occurred, completion has occurred, and so forth. This was kind of like if you were to think about how do I make content portable, how do I make content communicate, and the year is like 2000, 2001. So even before the internet, we had computer-based training that was like literally a DOS prompt. CBT, or computer-based training, is what occurred prior. We had stuff for video games, or desires to do video games. We had native apps that came out later that required a pivot. And what you've seen is SCORM 1.2, which came out in 2001, probably the most popular of the SCORM versions. And then later, about 3 years, we had SCORM 2004, which tried to address some of the missing things that some folks wanted. This was a design by committee, application, if you will, or architecture. This was kind of predated a lot of more later, more modern technologies, so it's had to stand the test of time. And I am actually talking to you, of course, here 20 years later, 22 maybe years later. So let's kind of dive into the bits and pieces. I like to break things up, let's say, into like threes to keep it simple and consumable. So SCORM had a packaging concept. That's what allowed you to move your content from point A to point B. It had a standard or a specification wrapped around it, which was supposed to enable adoption. Because this is coming from the Department of Defense at the US government level, and then we had contractors and subcontractors probably within this entire scope. And then, of course, you had like normal public education all the way through HR training. There wasn't a lot out there that allowed you to just do portable things. So again, a lot of chefs were in the kitchen. For the lack of better term, again, it's dated but still relevant. There were millions of dollars of content, if not billions of dollars of content produced using this standard. I see people even today still trying to use it in new and interesting ways and learn how do I figure out what the heck this thing was doing and how can I squeeze a score out of it and such. The easiest answer, the component you're looking for, is the SCOBot runtime API. That's what the platform physically promotes at the highest level. So in the likelihood of threes here, I like to stick with the data, the runtime itself, and the listeners that you're going to use to collect that data and know when to take action. What I mean by that is you're going to be initializing, you're going to be getting and setting values at a content level. The LMS is kind of hands off. You just basically provide this API. It writes the data for you. So you don't really have to do much. And then your queue is on commit. You typically save this data. So that's the LMS's responsibility to store this somewhere and on something. That could be a file, that could be a REST endpoint that you have on a backend service, some kind of action API or something else that you've created on your backend. And then how you store that data, be it a database, a NoSQL database, or a file system, again, ultimately up to you. This is lived on USB sticks, CD-ROMs, everything through the entire span of those 20 years. And again, we're talking cross technologies. So if we remember the old Flash player, if we remember all of the different video technologies that came out along the way, any attempts at the Unity 3D engine, this also led to other standards later, but again, how adopted those are, I'm just still going to say SCORM 1.2 was probably the most popular. Now, I try to stay with the lowest hanging fruit to get you going. And then I like to iterate forward to say, what other crazy things do you want to do? This helps you get this stood up as quick as possible. So let's dive into the self-guided demo quick. You can sign up yourself on this website. You'll get a code, punch it in, and then you're logged in. If you have a content package, you can drag and drop it or browse for it. And then when you upload it, if it's legit, it will validate and appear here as a card. And then you'll be able to launch the content. You have settings under this. And again, this was part of the SCORM specification. You can change audio levels, video, speed, language, and closed captioning. I have added the cross-domain capability. This gets a little more technical, but there are use cases where the content is not on your platform, and SCORM, since it uses JavaScript, results in what's called a cross-site security error. This is when we have to pivot and use cross-domain. So we place some files with the content that our platform can talk to. That's the easiest way to put it. So there's a workaround for that. And you can turn that off or on here to see that in a demo capacity. So you can do things like reset your progress, return to assignments if you want. I think I'm still kind of playing around with that goal. That's where you're in the content, it finishes, and it normally would return back, or it just sits there and the student gets confused. So there's a lot of usability things to consider when you're designing content. Some of this is out of your control because whoever made the content decided to make the decisions that they did, and that's outside of your purview. I often try to get asked, how do I debug some of this content? And again, it's not done the same way. Everybody's designing their own content their own way. There wasn't like just this template that was used. That would have been great. I think that would have increased adoption, but it also limits, like most people want to play around with, say, a true and false or a mix and match game or a drag and drop or whatever the activity happens to be. Okay, so there's a lot of different views associated with what we consider to be a lesson viewer, or I've heard it called a SCORM player. But, do note that content itself could be a single page or it could be multi-page. A shareable content could also be one piece of content that is one page or the multiple pages, or it could be many content objects all kind of blended together. So there might be a need for you to bundle this module or chapter, unit, lesson, whatever the terminology happens to be, as a grouping. SCORM kind of made this a little vague. It wasn't super clear, like if I'm uploading lesson upon lesson upon lesson, how do I organize that at the LMS level? So you have some purview here. You can choose to do it your own way. There are several things about the SCORM specification that just kind of left it up in the air, and it's for you to interpret. So I took the defensive programming standpoint of actually making a decision to say, you know what, I don't want to lose student data. I want to make this as resilient as possible. I want to provide an API that's not slow, and that's something more modern. So that's what you're getting with this. Now, if you don't know front end, and you're a back-end developer, you can use the supplied samples here, and this is the package that's provided, so you end up with that cross-domain I mentioned, documentation, JavaScript files, an Angular example, a jQuery example, and then sample services. And then within there, what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and launch the jQuery. This is the older one, and we're going to open this in a live server here so we can kind of see it functioning like it would on a website. So I'm just hosting it local here. Anybody who doesn't know IP addresses, don't worry about it. This is just mainly a local IP address on this machine on port 5500. Again, don't want to confuse you, but there's like a lot of ports, 65,000 plus ports. All right, so this index file loads up. This is rendered using, again, jQuery, HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, and I already said jQuery. You can use pretty much anything you want. You can hand code your own. You could use what's here. You could reach out to another framework, again, Angular, React, Vue.js, doesn't matter. Concepts are the same. You can load the content in what's called Light View or some other third party where it's like, we'll go ahead and test this out really fast. This would layer over the top of your platform in an iframe. And you could do it in a frame itself, which would be here. You could do it in a new window. That would almost pretty much be a new tab. And you can do it in a pop-up. Okay. So once you decide how you want content to launch, you can do that. And you may see types of functionality on other platforms that you want to replicate. I just chose to give you these options, but again, you can add your own. All right, so this is the lesson viewer. You can do things with a lesson viewer like piping in arguments. So we could say student equals Bob, you know, and basically you're passing in key values to this to make it more robust and do things that right now it's hard coded to do. So there's a lot of versatility here. So again, if you're coming at it where I don't want to do front end work, I want you to make it do the thing, I will make it do the thing for you. And then we can get it integrated and you're down the road. Generally for saving files or data, you're going to commonly need to get into something. That could be any programming language potentially, or some type of cloud service. Again, that's vast. It's a pretty big subject. But again, if you're non-technical, there's ways to get you partway there. And we can kind of help that. And again, it's so vast, I don't think I could spend any more time on that in this particular video. The Angular example, again, very similar to the jQuery one. It's just slightly more modern. This code is built, meaning you're actually using Node.js to perform a web build or webpack. You end up with a dist folder where the deployable app resides. And that's basically what I based on for this app. So if you happen to be here, and this one an example of multiple pieces of content in a single package, and then you're going to be launching that, letting the student perform this interaction. It'll be potentially graded and scored, and then they'll exit and come back. So those are the types of kind of interactivity that you're going to see going on. I hope that makes sense. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the backend services. You're going to have the need to do potentially some Node or JavaScript, because that's kind of what I'm supplying you examples in. So even if you translate this over to .NET or some other Ruby, Python, etc., you could totally do that. Just be aware that the unzipping is provided to you in JavaScript, so you can see me loading up a zip and extracting it. That is meant to be ran local here. You could play around with a folder here, and I've left comments on how that works. There's also a docs up above that. The parsing of the file also, like I put it through several tests. I grab content off the internet and then I run it through a test anytime I make a change. There is a lot with SCORM 2004. So again, I try to go with the low-hanging fruit and then figure out where you're at and then come to you. So I've been slowly building that up, but this parser's pretty much rock solid right now. I've had it employed now for about 4 years, and I didn't previously have this in the package. So these are things that I design and then include and then update anybody who's currently got this package. That way you stay up to date. You also have access to the source code if you choose. This is negotiable, but mainly I would give you access to the Git repo of your choice, and you would have full access as I make changes to see that. Plus you'd have the full source code if for some reason you needed that. But anybody else, you can get the base package that's obfuscated, more or less merged, compressed, shrunk, and shipped. That's what you would be using. So that's probably the best way to put it there as far as services go. I have had a question about CMI 5. It's maybe come up about twice the last 2 years. I think it's still kind of early. I do see at least the people that have adopted it seem to all be connected to each other in a way. So, but I'm all about, trying to support that. Just understand CMI5 is going to require you to have a pretty strong back-end team in order to support. I can write it in Node.js and I can provide you those examples, but if you want it in a different language, you're going to be doing some rewriting. And I've had to struggle to try to get the correct documentation on this because the way they format it is pretty hard on the eyes. But just be aware that is something possible. I just would strongly emphasize the fact that you're going to need to know how to program on that one. And it is not like SCORM, not even remotely. Okay, so I think this is a good spot to kind of take pause. Let's kind of just quickly cover the site here. So the SCORM packaging, this is again part of SCORM. There's again about 3 parts to SCORM: the packaging, the communication, and the student attempt object. There's potentially bolt-ons. They added like sequence and navigation. They had this what's called a shared data bucket or shared state persistence, where they would place data that could be shared between content objects. Don't feel like you got to run out and support this stuff immediately. Again, I'd rather you get the base needs done and then build out as you need more. But again, it also depends on your customer. If they're doing these things, we absolutely need to get them built out immediately. But the packaging itself, again, there are versions of SCORM. There's a reason I left those there, so you can pick what version of SCORM you're going to use. You can inject my content API if you want. That'll just make it walk and talk if you don't have SCORM support. And then you can organize folder structures or individual pieces of content, choose your launch file, pick the rest of these checkboxes, hit go, and it'll create a zip file for you. This entire thing was based on Adobe Air, and they have since handed that off, I believe, to a company called Harmon. So you can download the latest package there and launch this. Again, this is for licensed users. I can offer you a demo if you'd like, so you can reach out if you do want to see that. But this just kind of keeps the lights on for me. Again, I try to keep my server costs as low as possible, so even this costs me dollars. And I have people, like I think I just had somebody last night upload content over 62 times. And it's kind of refreshing to see people using it, to be honest. But at the same time, I love seeing it put through its paces because that helps me. I actually get alerts if something goes wrong, and I can react to it. And all of you benefit from that update. Just like if something goes wrong, I hear it from you. I can update the code. Everybody benefits. So again, we're fast forward here 10 years. Most of that stuff's all ironed out. Again, you've got access with this documentation here and how to implement it, so we can very early debug content for you. Like if you've got a customer and you've got a question, send me the content. I'll check it out. I'll let you know what you're in for. Same with no coding versus some coding versus you have a full dev team. I can kind of give you a range of how long it'll take to get some of this going. All right, and then the runtimes themselves, this is what allows you to listen to the content performing these gets and sets. I try to add a little humor to this page because I know this is intense stuff, but you're going to be able to step through this, see some sample data, see some sample code, and see listeners and possibly what you might do to record information and data. And you're going to possibly be using stuff like Electron. You could be using some other API wrapping or native app wrapping tool to create all kinds of stuff. So I've got folks at universities using this, the United Nations. We've got small businesses. We got people where they're completely distributed teams in Africa, India, Singapore, West Germany, you name it. So I've seen just about everything, even beyond my wildest expectations. I'm mostly impressed at the international community that has picked this up. And of course, as we go through the years here, I'm still kind of like reminded that this standard is still being used widely today. And so again, I think everybody, this has been a pretty cool decade. And if you're here, hopefully I've answered some of your questions. Again, I also appreciate you even finding me. I realize going through search engines and forums and Stack Overflow and everything else in between is a big pain. So again, thanks for that. I have a lot of extra details here too. And again, always just reach out if you got questions. Probably the most common question I get is, what do I need to do to display this stuff? And hopefully that answered your question. It's this. I understand it does have a fee. If you do need to perform a review, get on the horn with me. I can provide you with a demo so you can see the customer's content running with this package. That'll give you some confidence to know. I've also had people purchase this well outside of a year in advance of them even working on it. So do know I normally cover you initially with some meetings up front, any type of email support. I try to get back with you within about 24 hours. Sometimes I'll have you send me content. We can share that via some type of Google Drive or Dropbox or something, and can supply you back with some logs and some inkling, hopefully, of what's going on, and if it's something with the content or something with your implementation. Okay, so I hope everybody's having a great day. I'm going to leave it there. I believe, yeah, we hit 20 minutes. That's awesome. All right, so everybody have a good one. Talk to you later.